Colorado obviously found a way to win the football game, but it was not as pretty as it was last week against TCU. Nebraska gave them a little bit more trouble than maybe they wanted, but they still found a way to pull out a win. They found a way to capitalize on Nebraska's mistakes, and they found a way again to come out with a 36-14 win. So Colorado still showed plenty of signs of their strengths, but they also showed that there's still some things they need to improve upon if they want to be a national contender, which this point, you can't really say if they're going to be, but the signs are there. If they end up being a contender in this conference, we'll look back at their strong start and say this is exactly why. The first thing you have to note for either side is the turnovers, the mistakes by Nebraska, and mostly on Jeff Sims. You hate to put it on one player, but the three missed snaps, the turnovers, and just the inability to take care of the football probably is what did it in for Nebraska. Colorado really did well when they were able to capitalize upon that. And when you're in a game that's close, you simply cannot afford to turn the ball over, and you cannot afford to make those mistakes. And Nebraska did that. They kind of wasted a strong defensive performance because when you look at what they were able to do. So we talked about Colorado last week and their offensive line play. And I think that their offensive line play was better. Now, it's not good, it's not great, but it's definitely better. There are times where this group is really good. And I think that pass pro is where they're really strong at times, but also there's plenty to improve upon. However, when you have a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, we'll talk about him more in a little bit, but when you have that guy who can escape pressure, who can extend plays, that's when you get extra yards. That's when you get extra time. And maybe your offensive line looks better. But this offensive line play definitely was better despite the 8 sacks they gave up. And that's where you have to tip your cap to Nebraska's defense. This was a unit that was put in poor situations time and time again against Colorado, and they did the best they could. There were times where Colorado made it look easy, but there were also times where Nebraska stepped up and made plays. They were very physical. And this was a chippy game. There was a lot of trash talking going on. There were penalties called for unsportsmanlike conduct. These were two teams that do not like each other. And these were two teams that were giving it everything they had to make sure that their team came out on top. And Nebraska's defense, despite being put in poor positions and almost every single drive, they responded the way you should for that unit. And this unit won't get as much attention as they deserve this year, but this is a unit that is a solid unit. They played well the last 2 weeks, and eventually you're going to cave. Like at a certain point, when your offense just isn't doing what it needs to do, then you eventually will cave. You can only handle so much, especially for this Nebraska team. And really, a lot of that goes to the offensive staff. But we'll talk about that more when we get into Sims. Shadeur's magic was once again on full display. We talk about how good Caleb Williams is at escaping pressure and extending plays, but Shadur Sanders rivals that ability. We saw him make a number of plays this week by simply not getting sacked. There were times where, yes, this offensive line, they gave up 8 sacks, but it could have been double digits. That's how good Nebraska played in terms of getting after the quarterback. There were just times where Shedeur was just the better player. And his ability to extend plays was a big reason this team thrived offensively. He's threw for 393 yards, and now his 2 week total is the fourth most in Pac 12 history in the last 20 years. He is a phenomenal player. He is obviously one of the hottest players in college football right now. He is so fun to watch. He makes this team better. This offense is better because of his ability to extend plays, his ability to make big time throws. And that's really where this team steps up. And even when they're struggling, the best thing they did today was stack plays when they needed to, stack positive plays on top of each other. They didn't always do that. This was definitely a struggle for a while, but they found ways to stack good plays after good plays. And that was coming after mostly the turnovers that they saw from Nebraska, and they were able to capitalize on that. They took that turnover. I think the first touchdown was a perfect example of that. They create a turnover. Really, Jeff Sims just drops the ball, but they take that, and the next play, they throw it for a touchdown. So they were able to stack plays, and that's really what helped them take advantage of this game, they were able to take a step forward because they were able to stack those plays. And like I said, it's really a result of the talent that they've brought in. And yes, we had some questions about that coming in, but we also know that this is a super talented team and a group that we saw different players step up today. It wasn't the same guys that we saw in week one. We saw other players step. Xavier Weaver was a perfect example of that. But there are other players that stepped up. And the quarterback situation for Colorado is pretty much the same thing. Now, Shedeur did not break his own record, but he still threw for 393 yards. He also completed 31 of his 42 passes. So the efficiency is still there. You'd still have to tip your cap to Sean Lewis, because if Sean Lewis doesn't call the plays that he's calling, Shedeur is probably fine, but he deserves plenty of that respect and plenty of that love, because he's a phenomenal play caller who did a great job of helping this team capitalize on the turnovers that were created by their defense, and they turned that into points. And sure, obviously won the quarterback battle today. There's no doubt about that. There's no debate. This was an easy game for him in terms of production and beating out his opponent. Jeff Sims simply just did not have it. There were times where I thought Jeff Sims could make some really good plays. Now, in his defense, there were also times where he did not get much time to throw, but it was just kind of right back to his Georgia Tech days where you're just making poor decisions because you don't trust your team. Now, I will say the offensive staff is not good at Nebraska. Hiring Marcus Satterfield was not the right choice, in my opinion. Matt Rule just, I don't know. You can't just fire him after 2 games, but it's obvious that this wasn't the right choice. Jeff Sims is not being put in good situations. There's a play calling at times is not good as well, but obviously in the end, you have to have your quarterback step up. And now the question is Jeff Sims' time at Nebraska over? Like, are they going to move on from him? Because it was not good today. The procedural stuff, the snaps, you have to figure that out. You're an experienced quarterback. Yes, you're in a new system, but you're an experienced quarterback that should know how to time up some of those things, and you should be able to catch a snap. The 3 of the snaps we're talking about are all on Jeff Sims. Now, once you get past that, that's when you go to the offensive staff. But the turnovers simply didn't help. The turnovers were just brutal to watch. The turnovers are essentially what kept, I guess it really gave Colorado the lead. If this offense was even average, Nebraska probably has the lead going into halftime. Colorado obviously took advantage of that, and as they should have. But if Nebraska doesn't just shoot themselves in the foot, then I think you're looking at a Nebraska team that's closer at halftime or maybe even leading, because you pretty much just gave Colorado points. And that's on the offense. That's on the quarterback. And it's disappointing to see a guy that's so talented like Jeff Sims not work out and his new team not be able to help him in a way that elevates his game and makes him more consistent. Because right now, the issues that he's having are just not acceptable. And Colorado, you have to give them credit. They took advantage of that. And like I said before, it wasn't the same cast of characters for the most part that were absolutely dominant. I mean, you didn't see Dylan Edwards didn't have a great game. And then you look at Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter wasn't in the spotlight that much. They still talked about him quite a bit, but he didn't have the game that he had in week one. And that's to be expected. He's not going to have a great game every single game. Now, Shedeur still had a good game, so that's still the same. But Xavier Weaver had 170 yards and 1 touchdown. He was phenomenal for Colorado's offense. And there's so many playmakers that we could talk about. The one thing I think I have the biggest concern with this offense is their inability to run the football efficiently. Nebraska held them to just 58 yards rushing, and that's not going to get the job done against the Pac-12. Yes, you could probably throw the ball as much as you want, but in the end, you will have to run the ball at some point. The defense wasn't the best, but they were definitely better than they were last week. And I think that they created the turnovers, like we mentioned. They were able to get the ball back to their offense. And in the end, that's really all you can ask for. Last week, I talked about how this group can just be opportunistic, take care of the football on offense. And then the defense essentially just creates some turnovers, even if they're giving up yards and points. Now, they did a great job of keeping Nebraska off the scoreboard and creating turnovers. So that was definitely something that helped quite a bit. And then we talked about Nebraska. It's a very frustrating time to be a Nebraska football fan. And I can see why people might think that Matt Rule isn't the answer. And I understand the frustration. I understand why you think that, but you have to give it time. And I know that's frustrating to hear, and that's I don't know. It's frustrating to see the same issues arise week after week. With obviously changes will be made. There, Matt Rule has a good history of turning things around. So it's just a matter of time. His defense is good. We have to give the credit to the defense. They played their tails off. They were able to create some turnovers, and they were able to create some not turnovers. They were able to create some big plays, some disruptive plays, and that really helped them quite a bit. And it wasn't enough, obviously. The defense can only do so much. And the tough part is that if the offense doesn't figure anything out, then Nebraska is probably going to struggle defensively because they're just going to wear out their playmakers, and it's not going to be a good time for anybody involved. So another good win for Colorado, building upon that momentum from week one. Nebraska once again back to the drawing board.